Hello and welcome back. You're tuned in to the Rose Bros podcast. This episode, we are joined by Audrey Mascarenhas, CEO of Questor Tech, for another edition of the Rundle Eco-Cap podcast series, where the idea is to explore companies making a profit while also giving back to the environment. Questor is a clean technology company listed on the Toronto Stock Exchange with a market cap of approximately $40 million. Questor provides technology to reduce pollution emissions, maximize data, and increase energy efficiency. In simple terms, Questor provides hardware to industrial applications and well sites in order to cleanly combust waste gas streams like methane that otherwise would be flared into the atmosphere. This reduction in emissions helps reduce harm to the environment and protects people from breathing in these harmful gases that often contain carcinogenic properties. Audrey also holds a bachelor's degree in chemical engineering from the University of Toronto and a master's degree in petroleum engineering from the University of Calgary. She is a fellow of the Canadian Academy of Engineers, has served as a distinguished lecturer with the Society of Petroleum Engineers, is a member of the Schulich Industry Engineering Advisory Council, and currently chairs the Canadian Federal Government Clean Technology Strategy Table. We sat down for a smooth cup of Rose Bros coffee and, among other things, discussed creating social license and why it's good for business, how methane reduction is important for the environment, and pragmatic clean tech solutions. Also, this episode is available on YouTube, so if you enjoyed the conversation, subscribe to the Rose Bros channel. It will go a long way to helping the show. Also, this week's podcast was brought to you by Rundle Eco-Services. Looking for a way to recycle your frac pond and pit liners used in the oil and gas industry? Rundle collects and processes liners using an environmentally friendly system, leaving a clean environmental footprint. These liners are then shredded and processed into pellets that can be extruded into various forms of usable plastic products, including furniture, various building materials, and industrial packaging. Check out rundleco.com for more details on how you can recycle your industrial pond and pit liners today. Well, we'll start recording then.
Okay.
Audrey Mascarenhas, I really appreciate you doing this.
It's my pleasure.
Thanks a lot for your time. You are the CEO of Questor Tech. What is Questor Tech?
So we're a clean air technology company that has really been focused for the last 25 years on eliminating harmful emissions into the atmosphere. And so we've got patented technology that allows us to take any waste gas stream, make sure that it's cleanly combusted at 99.99% efficiency, which means the only things coming off the top of our stack in terms of emissions is CO2 and water and nitrogen. And in this day and age when we're all talking about climate change and methane and emissions, we're one of the most effective ways to truly reduce greenhouse gas emissions and make a big impact right now.
What would your key value proposition be to a customer?
So it's the ability not only to make sure their air quality and their staff are protected, they meet regulation, create the win with community, and at the end of the day, have a big impact on getting to net zero.
Engineer by training.
I am. I didn't mean to be an engineer, but I did my undergraduate at the University of Toronto. I really wanted to go to med school, but I was putting myself through school. And so I picked engineering because in case I didn't make it to med school, it looked like engineers were in demand and would get jobs. As I went through the program, my summer job experience actually helped me develop a love for the discipline. I worked for Texaco the first summer at their refinery in Anacoke. I came out to Alberta in my second summer and worked as an operator for Pan Canadian and Brooks. Came back the third summer, and when I graduated, I had 9 or 10 job offers, a little bit of student debt. So I thought I'd work for a couple of years and then I'd go to med school. I never went to med school. I didn't even apply. Worked for golf for 22 years and had a wonderful, amazing career at golf. They moved me every couple of years. So I've had a chance to work reservoir production, operations, facilities, corporate development, joint venture, you name it.
Field operator in Brooks. engineering in Toronto, that's a big difference.
It is. And I must say, so Pan Canadian hired me, and they'd never had a female operator in the field. And I'm paraphrasing, I think they said she survived working night shift at the refinery in the pump house. Let's give it a shot. So I showed up in Brooks. Everyone knew who I was. They would go, "You're the new girl operator." But I had an amazing summer. The guys were great. Now, it was a bit of a culture shock because we'd immigrated from Kenya in East Africa to Toronto. That was a big culture shock because I grew up in a tiny town in Africa to Toronto. And then, of course, I got used to Toronto, and then I came out to Brooks, Alberta. And all these wells were in the middle of nowhere, so it took me a while to figure out how to find the wells. Brooks was actually a wonderful little town. But of course, it was quite flat and dry in Brooks. And I thought, it smelt a little bad. And I thought, this isn't a very pretty province. But that summer I worked as an operator. And then the mechanic said, "Audrey, we're overhauling a Waukesha engine and compressor. Ask them if you can help us." And I said, "Oh, no, they won't. They need me to be an operator." But I asked, and Pan Canadian said yes. So for a month, I worked with the mechanics. And we did a whole compressor engine overhaul, took it apart, put it back together again. And I thought, okay, I get engines now. And then that next summer, I actually came back for Pan Canadian in Calgary. That was when I saw the mountains. And then I thought, this is the most beautiful province I've seen. So I really fell in love with the mountains.
Western Alberta is a little different than Eastern Alberta.
Exactly.
Driving outside of Calgary is a little different to rural Alberta. I can only imagine what it was like coming from Toronto to rural Alberta.
Oh, it was big culture shock. But, I stayed with this wonderful couple, Vicky and Ray Smith, who owned Smith Trucking. And it was actually a really magical experience. They had nine sons, and they opened up their home to me. And Mr. Smith was a big teaser. And actually, it's a funny story because one of the days he showed me this big, enormous scar. And it was right when they were putting the bulls out into pasture. And he said, "You've got to be really careful because this is what happened to me." So for a couple of weeks, whenever I got to site and I had to do something with a well, I would park the truck right next to the wellhead and leave the door open just in case. And one day I was helping Vicky in the kitchen. And she was telling me about Ray's surgery for gallstones or something. And I said, "So you mean that big scar? That's why?" And she said, "How do you know about the scar?" And so I told her the story. And she said, "Oh, he's pulling your leg."
Probably good practice to park a safe distance from the well anyways. So. Did you always want to start your own company or be CEO of a company? Or was the goal just to get a good job in engineering and see where it took you?
Well, actually, I like I said, I was going to go to med school, and I started my career in engineering, and of course in oil and gas. And Gulf Canada Resources was an amazing company to work for. I retired actually from Gulf in 1999 because I had two kids at the time, a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old, and time was flying by, and I said, I've always assumed I couldn't be a stay-at-home mom. That I should try it and be conscious of the choices because it would be too late when my daughter was 16 to say, "Oh, I wish I hadn't worked so much." And I had a wonderful summer with them, but by September I went, "Oh my goodness, what have I done?" And realized that the way that my mind worked doesn't lend itself to kind of routine and staying home. So I decided to come back to work. And I decided that I'd been given all these wonderful opportunities. I've had a wonderful career in oil and gas that I really wanted to give back. Because for some reason, I've gone on a journey that wasn't the journey that I thought, but it had given me some amazing skills. And I decided that I really wanted to focus on the emissions and environment side. I'd put in flares. I'd been at sites with black smoky flares. And I really felt we could do things differently as an industry. So the motivation to be an entrepreneur and be part of a startup was more from that perspective. I knew that this would be a hard journey. And as you can imagine, in 1999, as I announced that I was going to work on emissions and environment, having come from the oil and gas industry, everyone said I was crazy, including my husband, who said, help me understand this. No one's ever going to care about emissions or environment. You're turning down all these high-paying jobs in oil and gas, and the nanny's going to make more money than you. How does this make business sense? And I said, at this point in my career, I want to give back, and I know someday people are going to need to care about emissions and environment. So I didn't think it was going to be 22 years later, but finally we're starting to talk about the impact of methane, the fact that it's, over a 20-year period, 86 times worse than CO2. And this is, making sure it doesn't go into the atmosphere is one of the easiest things we can do to stop the temperature rise. And that's what Questor is really good at.
Where did the idea for Questor come from?
So it stands for in search of. And Questor was first formed by a group of investors who said, we'll gather up all these environmental technologies, go public, and it was during the dot-com era. So when I got here, we had a suite of technologies. We'd just really gone public. And of course, what I was really passionate about was the emissions side of it. As I evaluated all the other ones, really decided that we should focus on the clean combustion side. Questor was formed in 1995. We went public in 98. I joined in 1999. So it's been a wonderful journey. It's been a tough journey because we've had to figure out how to tell the story, make sure we build good equipment, show how we add value, and then wait for the world to catch up and actually care about emissions.
So you kind of pared down and zeroed in on a technology you felt was more valuable than the others, and that was in emission reduction.
Yep. I could see a clear value proposition. I guess I was a big believer in, number one, make sure you build good equipment. And then make sure you're clear on how you add value. So demonstrate where you bring value to your clients. And then, of course, the world has to care about the problem you're solving. So, and it finally does. Yep.
In layman's terms, Questor provides hardware to well sites in industrial settings to reduce the emissions?
Yeah. So we have this patented unit that is able to cleanly combust a multitude of waste gas streams that are at site that typically get vented or flared. And the problem with venting and flaring these waste gases is, number one, if you don't do it well, you put all kinds of pollutants into the atmosphere, including methane. In addition, it's an enormous waste of energy. And a lot of times, because it's not efficient, it tends to be black and smoky and put out these other hazardous air pollutants, which have a big impact on air quality and, of course, people's health. So a lot of the pushback that is happening, especially in communities where oil and gas activities are, is due to the fact that the communities feel concerned about the impact it's having on their health.
When you go to a company and you sell your product, is it a tough sell at times, or was it a tough sell in the 2000s and when maybe the concerns for the environment weren't as strong? How did you sell your product to customers?
It was tough because no one had to do anything, right? So we didn't have rules that said you have to pay attention to the pollutant. So sometimes it was, in the early days, in the well testing drilling side, it was about tight holes. And not, other people not wanting to see how successful you were when you were drilling a well in case you wanted to buy land around it. Later on, it became about making the community happy. So in Drayton Valley, we really supported a lot of producers who saw a great play in Drayton Valley, but because of the issues around the Lodgepole disaster, there was a whole community that was really, really concerned. So we became a great way to bridge the gap between industry and community. Sometimes it was around reducing costs. So reducing operating costs, reducing fuel gas usage, or safety, right? So making sure that the site was safer or their employees were protected at site.
Was it a big expense up front for companies when you're installing the hardware?
Not really. So I think, especially because we have a rental fleet, the rental cost per day is quite insignificant. And the reason I say that is one of our super clients was Nexen. And what a lot of people don't realize is Nexen had over 80 wells within the city of Calgary with over 34% H2S. And of course, those wells were drilled before the city grew. But Nexen had said, yes, the rules allow us to flare, but we know the community's concerned. And what was really wonderful about Nexen was they were really leaders in this space around ESG. They said, yes, the rules allow us to flare, but we're going to use best available technology because we know that you guys are concerned. And they said, we've picked Questor because they're good at what they do. And for 8 or 9 years, our portable unit followed their workover rig. And there was never one complaint. Sometimes we were across from the elementary school, the Starbucks, in someone's backyard. A lot of times we were on the clover leaves of Stony Trail and Deerfoot. I think that probably speaks enormously to the value of taking this different perspective. So don't wait for the rules, even though the rules don't require you to do this. This is an enormous opportunity to create social license or have a big impact on your ESG initiatives.
Everyone likes to say they're helping the environment, and I think it's really cool helping the environment and what Questor is doing, but a lot of people don't actually do it. Mm-hmm. Was it tough to convince people to give back to the environment? Or
it still is. Are you kidding me? If for some reason we have this misconception that we've got to pick one or the other.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And we think that if we do the right thing environmentally, it's going to cost us a fortune. And so we work really hard to keep the status quo. So we all say we care. And I have a saying, I said, no one does the right thing unless someone makes them. We all have the intention of doing that, but reality is if we believe that it's going to cost us more, we don't. Reality, I think, is we have lost sight of the bigger picture. It actually costs us more if we don't get to drill a well, if we don't get to build the pipeline, if we don't find the way to create the win-win. We actually spend a lot more money fighting the community with lawyers, going to hearings, and we then increase the risk on a project, which oftentimes means it may or may not get the go-ahead to proceed. And I'll tell you why I say that. I told you the story about Nexen. At the same time, a company called Compton wanted to drill a well in the south part of the city. Their approach was the rules allow us to flare. There's less than a 1% chance anything will happen, so we're going to flare. The whole community was absolutely concerned. So Mary Jane in her kitchen was saying, that H2S gas, it's really dangerous. Just 1% will kill me. So they ended up with lawyers fighting the community. They went to a hearing At the hearing, their CEO was asked, will you relocate to the community while you're drilling the well? And he responded, well, we're a public company and my shareholders expect me to be at the office every morning. And your site is too far away. They ended up not losing the opportunity to drill that well. So they didn't realize that play or the opportunity there.
Yeah, didn't they go bankrupt?
Yes, they did. Exactly. Right? And for what? Maybe it would have cost them $60,000 to use us for the period that they were drilling the well. We were working with Nexen at the same time. So we had a track record that showed we created the win with community. And it was all because of this belief that I'm following the rules. I don't have to go above. And I think we're in that position again. We're doing a lot of talking about net zero and climate change. But reality is we don't have till 2030 or 2050. We've got an opportunity, I think, right now to have a big impact that would actually stop the temperature rise, save the planet, but create a great future for our province, not only in making sure our reserves don't get stranded, but create jobs for a whole bunch of young people. I sit on the advisory board for the Faculty of Engineering at U of C. It is breaking my heart to see all these young kids graduate, not feeling that they have a place here, right? And they're leaving our province. Well, I think we've got a big opportunity to not only be leaders in clean tech with credible, tangible things, but create great opportunities here, but grow our GDP as a.
Getting back to the costs associated with installing the technology to help emissions, in real simple terms, what percentage would that take off the producer's margin if you were to give a really broad picture?
Less than 1 or 2 cents. And I'll answer it in another way. A lot of the projects that we're doing, we're reducing CO2 equivalent or greenhouse gas emissions at a cost of less than $1 a ton. Recognizing the carbon tax is $50 a ton. There's a big win already there. So combining it with our clean combustion equipment, we've also got converting that waste heat to power. The combination of put those two technologies together actually reduce GHG emissions for a zero to negative cost. And because of the liability of carbon on companies' balance sheets, the capital investment in our equipment generates an over 100% return on investment. So the business case is solid. We're credible. We've got equipment all over the province. We've got a unit at the Crossfield Gas Storage Facility. It's been in there since 2006. So it's not that we don't build good equipment. We're known globally for building good equipment. We're the leaders in the world. We've got ISO certification on our combustion efficiency. We have a strong business case. So you have to ask and say, why isn't there more equipment? Why do we still continue to flare and vent when there's such a strong business case around emission reduction? And I think it's because we're afraid to open up the Pandora's box, because then we'll have to do something everywhere.
Would companies qualify for carbon credits using Questor?
You bet.
Really?
But our carbon credit system is broken right now.
$50 a ton, I think it is right now?
Yes, but it's very limited to specific things like replacing pneumatics or compressor seals. But we're missing the big volumes in our big emissions. So we've got a system right now that protocols get developed. And because we don't have a good understanding of what our total emissions are, or we don't talk about them, all of our carbon offsets are created from very specific minor emissions. We don't even have a good sense of our base case. And let me explain that a little bit more. What we haven't accounted for is the fact that equipment fails. So when an engine compressor goes down and we want to start it up again, we vent all of the gas in the compressor so that we can do a soft start and make it easier for our engine. We never account for that. Just like your car, an engine has to be maintained. After so many hours, we've got to do maintenance on it. And if it's attached with a compressor, we're venting that volume again. When we pig pipelines or we do repairs and maintenance on a pipeline, we're venting that volume. So there are so many places in our facilities and in our operations that we're releasing harmful pollutants to the atmosphere, but we don't account for it. So if you have the wrong base case and you're focused on the wrong pieces of your emissions, then you're misleading yourself to say, well, I've reduced my emissions 70%. So we're a big believer that we should be taking a more holistic approach to what's happening on our emissions. We know that we unload wells, right? When we unload wells, we're releasing methane. So our system, I think, is broken. But we know that we're starting to see leaders in the regulatory space, like the US, that are starting to talk about that. In addition, the satellites and the drones that are flying over all of these oil and gas facilities are pinpointing how significantly we've underestimated our emissions, right? And every week, the numbers come out. We've been using emission factors that we know are incorrect. We could be underestimating them 3 to 20-fold. But we shouldn't look at that as a negative. We should look at it as a great opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Why is emission reduction important? For example, some people would argue that the Earth goes through natural cycles and that sometimes the Earth heats and cools. What would your response be to that?
Well, I would say in the last 5 years, every year has been warmer than the other. That may or may not be the case, but why would you, if the solution was so simple, why would we sit there and risk that? In addition, the reason I'm so passionate about what I do It's not even just about climate change. It's about air quality. And reality is, if you're breathing harmful pollutants, that couldn't possibly be good for you. So if there was a technology that made a lot of sense that guaranteed no harmful volatile organic compounds which are carcinogenic get into the atmosphere, no benzene, toluene, or BTEX get into the atmosphere, that's carcinogenic too. Particulates, we know that has an enormous impact on kids. Wouldn't you want to do that? And I think this is a big social justice issue, because guess who gets to live next to a lot of the facilities that are emitting harmful pollutants?
Low value real estate.
Right. So people that aren't wealthy.
Don't have the money.
Exactly. But for me, the fact that it doesn't cost much and there's technology already available and we could collectively have a great impact, I continue to be puzzled why there is such a disconnect. I just spoke at Globe and did a walrus talk 2 weeks ago. And the analogy I used was, as I travel all over the world, all of us have one common value that no one will disagree with me on. And that is, we want our kids to be happy, to have a great future. And we will do anything in our power to make it so for them, at the sacrifice of ourselves. I think right now we're facing a similar crisis. And I can see it in the eyes of young people. So why aren't people in my generation sitting at the table, rolling up their sleeves, going, how can we make sure that they have a great future? Instead, we're stuck in polarizing conversations, in misinformation. We're thinking we have till 2050, but we don't. We need, if I tell you right now, for less than $1 a ton, we can reduce 1 gigaton of CO2 equivalent every year easily. It would cost around $3.6 billion, the same amount of money we've currently spent on 2 carbon capture projects that have had a fraction of the impact. And we're not even having that conversation.
Do you think it's partly because it's just hard enough just to find energy and oil, natural gas, and that most people's time is taken up just by finding the products and not thinking about the environmental consequences? Or
we can get away with not thinking about it, right? So like I said, no one does anything unless they have to. And because there's so much misinformation in this space, it's easy to go off on tangents, to have big, bold goals of net zero. Well, what does net zero really mean? And it gives everyone an excuse not to do anything right now because we're trying to find the solution to get to net zero. And we're wasting trillions of dollars, not only in the R&D, but the natural disasters that are occurring. To me, it would make sense to do what's the easy stuff we can do, the low-hanging fruit that'll get us 80% of the way there, so that we actually do something and that we stop the temperature rise and that we do create this great future for our kids.
Do you find it hard to position Questor and yourself as a very practical solution with an engineering background compared to some of the pie in the sky things like we were just talking about?
We don't even have a voice. Everyone is in love with shiny and sexy.
Exactly.
But shiny and sexy isn't going to get us there, because what everyone is failing to see is all of the shiny and sexy is in R&D phase. The probability of being successful is less than 1%.
Whereas Questor has practical applications.
Got 25 years of proof. Yes, 25 years ago, probability was low. But we've got equipment all over the world. We've got, we just received ISO 14034 certification. We're the only company in the world with this ISO certification for our combustion efficiency. So what does it mean? It means any client that uses us knows that we have been ISO certified to deliver 99.99% combustion efficiency. So I know that if I take a flared stream or a vented stream, I will guarantee to clients that I've destroyed the methane. I've destroyed the VOCs. I've destroyed the BTEX. There's no particulates, that anyone living around our equipment can feel comfortable that their health isn't being negatively impacted.
The purpose of a company at the end of the day is to make money, or else the company will die.
Yep.
Has it been difficult being in the green tech space to make money and provide a return to shareholders and pay everybody, or has it been easy?
Well, it hasn't been easy, but I'm proud to say we're one of the few clean tech companies that has actually grown from cash flow.
I heard that.
We are profitable. We have a business model. So I'm a big believer. If the technology can't stand on its own and needs to be subsidized, it's not ready to be commercialized, and we shouldn't be subsidizing it because it hasn't proven its way. If you're breaking the rules of thermodynamics, trying to reverse entropy, I'm sorry, it's never going to make business sense, and it's never going to solve the problems the world needs. So my journey at Questor has always been focused on it's got to have good equipment. It's got to make business sense. You got to show people how you add value. And then all the other pieces take care of themselves. We're sitting right now, even through the tough times, with a clean balance sheet. We have zero debt. We have cash in the bank.
That's pretty rare.
It's pretty rare. Not even in clean tech, in
any business.
Any business. But I knew I had to run that way because, number one, who cared about emissions and environment in 1999? Who was going to invest in environment and emissions and environment? Who would fund us? Who would give us money, right? So I knew that we had to do it and be very strategic, be very thoughtful about how we spent our money and never get ahead of ourselves.
Starting a company is very hard. Takes investment from yourself and time and money. Did you have to put up your own money to start the company?
You betcha. So I didn't tell that part in the story about my husband, right? He said, you're turning down all the high-paying jobs. No one's ever going to care about emissions and environment. The nanny's going to make more money. The piece I didn't mention was I was also putting personal money in. Because when I got to Questor, we weren't making any money. We had a whole bunch of debt. We had a whole bunch of people. So I joined, bailed it out, put personal money in, and
skin in the game.
Skin in the game. I have lots of skin in the game.
Most successful business people would tell you that's essential to running a good business. Do you think that's true?
Oh, definitely. I'm totally aligned. I own, through the sweat equity and the money that I've put in, I own 16% of the shares of this company. I'm very motivated. So not only am I motivated because I have ownership, but I'm motivated because this is my opportunity to give back for the great fortune I've had in my life. And, I didn't say this part, but I grew up in a tiny town in Kenya, Nakuru, maybe 40,000 people.
That's big for where I grew up.
In Kenya, that's pretty big too, but in Toronto standards, that's pretty small.
Yeah.
Right? And I was one of 4 girls in an East Indian family. And the first thing my grandmother said was, oh my goodness, to my parents, you'll never be able to afford the dowry. The fact that I got to come to Canada, I have a bachelor in chemical engineering, I have a master's in petroleum. I've had an amazing career in oil and gas. I started in oil and gas in 1982. I wasn't supposed to have an amazing career in oil and gas for a variety of reasons, and I did. So I truly felt when I came back to work that someone had given me all these wonderful gifts, that it was my chance to give back.
You're an engineer by training, but you're CEO now. Mm-hmm. So some people would argue, maybe not Elon Musk, but a lot of people would argue that the main job of a CEO is to be capital allocator, and your job is to find the best use of company funds. How do you view your role? Is it engineer or is it capital allocator?
It's being the visionary and seeing where I need to shoot the puck or where the puck's going to go, right? And then have a team that I help play the game. Right? So give them the leadership. In 1999, I could see today, I knew it was going to be a tough journey, but I knew someday people would care about emissions and environment. Just in the same way, we're working on waste heat to power because it's great that we can combust cleanly, but look at all this amazing energy that we could do something with. So I've got an amazing team that's working on how do we take low-grade waste heat and change it to clean power. I have another amazing team that's working on the data piece. Because we know in a couple of years, everyone is going to need to show transparency on what they really reduced in terms of emissions. And the world is only going to buy a hydrocarbon molecule that can be proven is a low carbon molecule. So it's going to become really important to have credible, transparent data that can be audited, which means understanding your entire emissions profile, just not a little piece of it, so that you can prove. So we're working on that. We're using drones, we're using satellite data, sensors, and our understanding of emissions at a site.
Do you spend your days looking into hardcore engineering problems, or do you spend your days looking at a spreadsheet and a balance sheet?
I have an amazing CFO that helps make sure that we stay on track. And I love working with my sales team and my engineering team and my ops team. And it's always about how can we be better? I love being in an environment where we can be innovative and think out of the box and feel each day that I made an impact or we did something better. I joke to everyone. And so one of the reasons I couldn't stay and be a stay-at-home mom, every morning, we've been in this office for 4 years, but every morning I want to beat Google. I continue to look and go, how can I optimize getting to the office? It's not just time. I look at efficiency. I for a while I tested Waze in Google to see which was giving me the better route. So my sense of accomplishment when I get to the office is, did I beat Google today?
That sounds like a very engineering response.
Exactly.
Only an engineer would say that.
Today I beat Google 4 minutes.
Do you worry that Canada has a lot of good regulation in place in the US and we're moving towards reducing carbon and emissions and whatnot, but at the end of the day, there's a lot of bad actors out there, for instance, Russia, India, China, and all the work we go towards reducing emissions and carbon is just going to be canceled out by bad actors?
No, because I think that's a cop-out. Each of us, I think, should do what we can do. And I would challenge that in Canada, we've got the best regulation in the world. I'll challenge that. Get to work all around the world. If we sit down on our laurels and say, well, I'm going to wait till someone else does something, we will fail the future generations and we will fail our planet. Our time is to take leadership and show what can be done so that everyone can follow.
If you can make money doing it, then you prove your point.
Well, exactly. And guess what? 90% of my revenue before the pandemic was outside of Canada. And a lot of my revenue was the United States. So I would disagree with the statement that we have the best rules. I've seen amazing things happen in Colorado. I've seen amazing things happen in California and other areas.
You had projects in Mexico too.
Yeah.
Who would have thought?
Well, exactly. And right now we're in heavy discussion in the Middle East, in Latin America. I even had a call from folks in Poland, in Trinidad and Tobago. Everyone's looking and saying, we've got a lot of methane escaping. We need to do something. Can you help us? And so for that, I'm extremely encouraged. I believe that we live in one of the most beautiful countries in the world. We have a standard of living that is far superior than 99% of the population on this planet. Which means we have the ability to be leaders because we have the resources to be leaders. We have the education system to be that. And shame on us if we don't.
I think the worry is that people don't think you can make money doing a business like this, but if you can, and it's an opportunity.
We're a perfect example of that. We've been around for 25 years. And like I said, despite the tough times in the pandemic, we have cash in the bank, zero debt, and we've grown entirely from cash flow. So we must be doing something that makes business sense, as well as doing good.
What's been the biggest challenge for Questor Technology?
I think we're 20 years ahead of our time. Right? So at many points in this journey, it has felt like pushing the rock up the hill. Or it's for all the effort and how hard we work. Sometimes it's not, you don't see it at the bottom line. So being able to make sure that the team believes, right? So I've got an amazing team that believes in the vision, right? Having people believe.
Kind of an HR problem, it sounds like.
No, not so much that, but it's even clients, right? Like, I mean, when I was talking about flaring and venting 20 years ago, the number of times people would say, well, no, it's 98% efficient. And I'm going, but it's black and smoky. It can't be. Or there's odor here, or it's impacted by the wind. It's continuing to not get discouraged and not have your team discouraged. Like, 2021 and 2020 were really hard years for us, right? We'd had wonderful growth. 2019 was some of our highest revenue. 2020 has been some of our lowest in 2021. Keeping shareholders engaged with you because we're public and believing in the vision that you have as well.
What's the biggest opportunity for Questor? Is it carbon capture, methane reduction, emissions in general?
So let me answer it in a different way. The biggest opportunity for us on the planet, which is also the biggest opportunity for us at Questor, is to not put methane into the atmosphere. Methane is 86 times worse than CO2. We've underestimated our methane emissions significantly. It only stays in the atmosphere for about 12 to 14 years. So it's the only thing right now that could have the impact to stop the temperature rise. It's not CO2 because CO2 stays there forever. But if we focused on methane and took all the money that we're spending on CO2 and put it in on methane, we would buy ourselves some time. And that's an enormous opportunity for Questor. In addition, the other technology that we've been working on is waste heat to power. We have enormous waste heat in everything, in engines, in the heat off the engine flue gas, in everything we've been flaring and venting. If I can convert that to power, guess what? It comes with zero emissions, small footprint. It's not dependent on the wind and the sun. My battery is amazingly simple. It's a hot water tank. There is only two things right now, according to MIT, that will stop this temperature rise. It's don't put methane into the atmosphere and improve your energy efficiency. And the example on energy efficiency, right now, every barrel of oil we use, we're only using 40% of the energy. We waste 60% of it.
In extraction and production?
Everything, at the end of the day, to the delivery to consumer. If I took that 40% and doubled it to 80, I would half my emissions right off the bat. In addition, I would half the amount of oil I need. Those two things have the greatest impact right now. The other analogy I'll give you around carbon capture, we've done 2 projects in Canada. Each cost over $1 billion to reduce 1 million tons a year of methane. Of CO2 equivalent, sorry. Mm-hmm. We're just completing a project in Mexico that took 13 sites that were venting all of their associated gas, 13 battery sites. By cleanly combusting the gas and not venting it anymore, and at 3 sites we're converting the heat to power to run the site. They're not anywhere near a grid. For that $8.5 million capital investment, we will reduce greenhouse gas emissions 450,000 tons a year. If I scale it to 1 million tons a year, which is the same goal the carbon capture folks have, it would be $20 million. So you tell me, if we're going to solve and make sure this planet survives, would you rather spend $20 million to reduce GHG emissions 1 million tons? Or would you rather spend over $1 billion? Right now, we're spending $1 billion. How is that going to be sustainable? How are we going to get enough capital resources to make a difference?
So a lot more bang for your buck.
Low-hanging fruit.
Interesting. Is that a tough story to sell, or?
It seems to be. Because I think you alluded to it earlier. We're in love with shiny and sexy. We're off on carbon capture and hydrogen and portable nuclear plants. Maybe down the road that'll make sense, but short term, we've got to do this in the next 20 years. Why wouldn't we pick getting to 80% of the way? Doesn't cost much. It's proven.
Seems like common sense.
Exactly, right? And as a taxpayer, I don't want us to be wasting a whole bunch of money. I don't think we can afford to as a country.
Is there much competition in this space? Do you guys have other people installing the same equipment as you, or do you face that problem?
Well, we have competition. So we're not the only company burning waste gas in an enclosed chamber. We're the only company with ISO certification. What we're really good at, so there's lots of companies that can handle low volumes, low pressure. That's not difficult to do. Mm-hmm. There's very few companies that can handle high volumes of rich gas. And that's really what we're well known for. In addition, we're well known globally for our expertise in H2S, or hydrogen sulfide gas.
So you don't worry about startups coming along, and I mean, it's business. That's kind of the nature of capitalism, and someone taking your spot, or is that the point of R&D in your business?
Well, that's the point of R&D,
Stay
right?
on the cutting edge.
And staying above and making sure, and because we have great understanding of our client's world, because we've been in our clients, we never sit across from our client going, I have no idea what you're talking about, but here's my new widget. My job is to make sure that we're always serving our clients' needs, that we're doing a good job in the field. We're written into some companies' specs. We're considered best practices for some companies. So I want to make sure that we're always relevant and we're staying ahead of the game. At the end of the day, it isn't our widget. It's the service we provide. It's the understanding. It's the solutions. We always want to understand what problem our clients are trying to solve, right? I'm always thinking about that. Right now, we're doing 4 great R&D projects, in addition to kind of what I talked about. One is the waste heat to power, and Sustainable Development Technology Canada is supporting us on that with some funding, and of course data, which was supported by Alberta Innovates and Western Economic Development in partnership with SAIT. But in addition, we're doing one with Stanford University using a catalyst, especially for those low concentrations of methane that we can't burn. So it's a methane slip. And it could come from agriculture or so many other places. There's another one that's in partnership with the DOE and the University of Michigan and Southwestern Research Center. And it's really around looking at what are the opportunities to make us even better.
What advice would you give to others looking to start a company in this field or embark on a journey in this field? In emissions reductions, carbon capture, methane reduction? What would you tell somebody?
So make sure that it makes technical sense. And that you're solving the right problem, and you're solving a problem. Mm-hmm. It's easy to have these great ideas, but you got to be clear on the impact that it's going to make. So
Makes
there's
money.
lots. Yeah, exactly. Because there's lots of great ideas out there, but you got to make sure that you're solving the right problem, and then you got to be resilient because it's tough.
Well, that's awesome. I think that's a great conversation.
Thank you.
50 minutes.
You've asked me lots of great questions, so thank you.
I really appreciate your time. Wrap it up there. Hey, thanks for listening, everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed the episode. If you liked what you heard, check out rosebros.ca, where we will have upcoming shows. Until next time, happy coffee drinking.